Okay, Adams' equity theory is another model. Equity theory was first developed in the 1960s by Stacey Adams, workplace and behavioral psychologist who asserted that employees seek to maintain equity between the inputs that they bring to a job and the outcomes, on the other hand, that they receive from it again, and from it against the perceived inputs and outcomes of others. Equity theory states that people seek to maintain a balance between their inputs and the outcomes they receive, also in relation to the outputs of others. Fair treatment creates motivation. It adds a crucial additional perspective to motivation theory of comparison with referent others. People we consider to be in a similar situation, that is. Equity theory helps explain why pay and conditions alone do not determine motivation. It also explains why giving one person a promotion or pay rise can have a demotivating effect on others. When people feel fairly or advantageously treated, they are most likely to be motivated. When they feel unfairly treated, they are highly prone to feelings of dissatisfaction and demotivation as well. Employees seek to maintain equity between the inputs that they bring to the job and the outcomes that they receive from it against the perceived inputs and outcomes of others. The belief is that people value fair treatment, which causes them to be motivated to keep the fairness maintained within the relationship of their co-workers and the organization. Words like efforts and rewards or work and pay are an oversimplification, hence the use of the terms inputs and outputs as well. Inputs are logically what we give or put into our work. Outputs are everything we take out in return. Inputs, this term encompasses the quality and quantity of the employee's contribution to his or her work. Typical inputs include time, effort, hard work, loyalty, commitment, ability, flexibility, adaptability, tolerance, determination, enthusiasm, personal sacrifice, trust in superiors, support from co-workers and colleagues, skill, blah, 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 and so forth. Outputs can both be tangible and intangible. Typical outcomes are job security, esteem, salary, employee benefits, expenses, recognition, reputation, responsibility, sense of achievement, praise, thanks, stimuli, and so forth. Payment, however, is the main concern and therefore the cause of equity or inequity in most cases. In any position, an employee wants to feel that their contributions and work performance are being rewarded with their pay. If an employee feels underpaid, then will result in the employee feeling hostile towards the organization and perhaps their co-workers, which may result the employee not performing well at work anymore at all. Equity is all about perception. So Adams' equity theory is a far more complex and sophisticated and elaborate motivational model than merely assessing efforts as an inputs and reward as an outputs. Equity theory adds a crucial additional perspective of comparison with referent others, people we consider in a similar situation. Equity does not depend on our input to output ratio alone. It depends on people's comparison between our own inputs, output ratio, and the ratio of others. People form perceptions of what constitutes a fair ratio, a balance or trade, so to speak, of inputs and outputs by comparing their own situation with other reference points or examples in the marketplace as they see it. When people feel that their inputs are fairly rewarded by outputs, for instance, the fairness benchmark being subjectively perceived from market norms and other comparable references, then generally they are happier in their work and more motivated to continue inputting at the same level. They feel, however, that their ratio of inputs and to outputs is less beneficial than the ratio enjoyed by referent others, then they become demotivated in relation to their job and employer. Subtle variables play an important role for the feeling of equity. Just the idea of recognition for the job performance and the mere act of thanking the employee can cause a feeling of satisfaction and therefore help the employee feel worthwhile and have more outcomes. Generally, the extent of demotivation is proportional to the perceived disparity with other people or inequity. But for some people, just the smallest indication of negative disparity between their situation and other people's is enough to cause massive disappointment and a feeling of considerable injustice, resulting in demotivation or worse, open hostility. Some people reduce effort and application and become inwardly disgruntled or outwardly difficult, or even disruptive. Other people seek to improve the outputs by making claims or demands for more reward or seeking an alternative job. So, equity theory in business introduces the concept of social comparison. Employees who perceive inequity will seek to reduce it, either by distorting inputs and or outcomes in their own minds, as in cognitive distortion, directly altering inputs and or outcomes, or leaving the organization. Thus, the theory has wide-reaching implications for employee morale, efficiency, productivity, and turnover. It also explains why people can be happy and motivated by their situation one day, and yet, with no change to their terms and working conditions, can be made very unhappy and demotivated. They might learn that a colleague, or worse, an entire group, is enjoying a better reward-to-effort ratio. It shows why and how full-time employees will compare their situations and input-to-output ratios with the part-time colleagues. These probably earn less, however, it is the ratio of input-to-output reward-to-effort which counts. If the part-timer is perceived to enjoy a more advantageous ratio, it will have a negative effect on the full-timer's sense of equity, and with it, their personal motivation. Equity theory reminds us that people see themselves and, crucially, the way they are treated in terms of their surrounding environments, team, system, etc., not in isolation, and so they must be managed and treated accordingly. Equity theory has several implications for business managers. First, people measure the totals of their inputs and outcomes. This means a working mother may accept lower monetary compensation in return for more flexible working hours. Secondly, different employees ascribe personal values to inputs and outcomes. That means that two employees often equal experience and qualification performing the same work for the same pay may still have quite different perceptions of the fairness of the deal. Employees are able to adjust according to purchasing power and local market conditions. A teacher from Alberta may accept lower compensation than his colleague in Toronto, for instance, if his cost of living is different. Although it may be acceptable, that's the third point, for more senior staff to receive higher compensation, there are limits to the balance of the scales of equity, and employees can find excessive executive pay demotivating. Another factor is staff perceptions of inputs and outcomes of themselves and others may be incorrect, and perceptions need to be managed effectively. For example, an employee who believes he is overcompensated by increase his efforts. However, he may also adjust the values that he ascribes to his own personal inputs. It may be that he or she internalizes a sense of superiority and actually decreases his efforts. Herzberg's job design model. So let us continue with Mr. Herzberg. Frederick Herzberg was an American psychologist who became one of the most influential names in business management. He's most famous for introducing job enrichment and the motivator hygiene theory. In his 1968 publication One More Time, How Do You Motivate Employees? He sold more than 1.2 million reprints by 1987 and was the most requested article, and this was the most requested article from the Harvard Business Review. Herzberg's model is the most widely replicated and used in business. It splits hygiene factors from motivation factors. Hygiene factors are related to pain avoidance and lead to dissatisfaction when they are not satisfied. Motivation factors are related to the ability to achieve and experience psychological growth. The model introduces job enrichment for true motivation as opposed to job loading. Herzberg's theory is one of the most empirical and compelling theories about motivation. It's the only theory that splits out demotivating factors from motivating factors. It introduces the concept of movement versus motivation. It has produced more replications than any other research in the history of industrial and organizational psychology. There is KITAS, abbreviation for kicks in the ass. Herzberg researched hundreds of employees and companies and determined that most companies use what he unceremoniously refers to KITA, kicks in the ass. These are widely used under the erroneous belief that they will motivate their employees. He identified a score of KITAs in varying degrees of subtlety and impact. First off, you have negative psychological KITA. The literal kick up the buttocks and whiplashes may have helped build the pyramid. They're just not what today's worker and workers are looking for in the job. Secondly, there is negative psychological KITA. This entails all kinds of emotional games and manipulations to make someone perform more. This happens a lot as it can give quite an ego boost to the person administering the kick in the ass, basically. It does not have to get anyone excited to go and to get to work in the mornings, though. And then there is a positive KITA, meaning any kind of quid pro quo that an organization may use. A reward, an incentive, more status, a promotion. Many companies believe that these positive KITAs truly do motivate people. As Herzberg shows, they don't really, to be honest. They may create a pull, a kind of dog biscuit to wave in front of employees to get them jump, as Herzberg would put it. So let's have a look at these different aspects. Positive KITA. Here, Herzberg explains this is seduction. Where negative KITA is truly a practice to be abhorred, positive KITA makes employees party to their own motivational downfall. It's the American way. The organization doesn't have to kick you, you kick yourself. Herzberg goes on to show the ways positive KITA is administered. What Herzberg sees as true motivation is an engine inside a person that makes them keep going out of their own accord, without needing a constant pull from the company. What's fascinating about this is that even things like human relations training, and job participation don't intrinsically motivate people. They may charge a person's battery, but it will run flat again at some point of no real motivation is instilled. How do you install a generator in an employee? Herzberg was wondering. He first suggested that the factors involved in producing job satisfaction and motivation are separate and distinct from the factors that lead to job dissatisfaction. Semantically speaking, this may seem strange, but as Herzberg states, these two feelings are not opposites of each other. Herzberg explains this by turning to the different sets of needs human beings have in a way that is very reminiscent of Maslow's division of needs into two categories, the deficiency needs on the one hand and the growth needs on the other hand. The first set stems from our animal nature, the built-in drive to avoid pain from the environment, plus all the learned drives that become conditions to the basic biological needs. For example, hunger makes it necessary to earn money, and then money becomes a specific drive. The other set of needs relates to that unique human characteristic, the ability to achieve and, through achievement, to experience psychological growth. The stimuli for the growth needs are tasks that induce growth. In the industrial setting, they are the job contents. Motivation factors are achievement, recognition, responsibility, advancement, and the work itself. According to Herzberg, the factors leading to job satisfaction are separate and distinct from those that lead to job dissatisfaction. Therefore, managers who seek to eliminate factors that create job dissatisfaction can bring about peace, but not necessarily motivation. Herzberg suggests that work must be enriched or vertically loaded for true motivation to spark up. This is different from horizontal job loading, which reduces the personal contribution rather than giving opportunities for growth. Some examples here are challenging the employee by increasing the amount of production expected, adding another meaningless task to the existing one, rotating the assignments of a number of jobs that need to be enriched, removing the most difficult parts of the assignment. All right, Vroom's expectancy theory. Victor Vroom's primary research was on the expectancy theory of motivation, which attempts to explain why individuals choose to follow certain courses of action in organizations, particularly in decision-making and leadership. His most well-known books are Work and Motivation, Leadership and Decision-Making, and The New Leadership. Victor Harold Vroom is a business school professor at the Yale University and Yale School of Management. Vroom's theory separates effort from performance and outcomes, works on perceptions, and assumes that behavior is the result of conscious choices among alternatives aimed at maximizing pleasuring and avoiding pain. He introduces the concept of expectancy as an increased effort will lead to increased results, instrumentality, if you perform well, you will receive a valued outcome, and valence, value placed on the expected outcome. So, Vroom's expectancy theory emphasizes the mental process regarding choice, or choosing. It looks at self-interest and the alignment of rewards with people's wants and the connection between and the connection among expected behaviors. Rewards and organizational goals. For organizations, it helps them to relate rewards directly to performance and to ensure that the rewards provided are those rewards deserved and wanted by the recipients. Now, Vroom's theory assumes that behavior results from conscious choices among alternatives whose purpose is to maximize pleasure and to minimize pain, as I mentioned before. So Vroom realized that an employee's performance is based on individual factors such as personalities, skills, knowledge, experience, and abilities. He stated that effort, performance, and motivation are linked in a person's motivation. He used the variables expectancy, instrumentality, and valence to account for this. Now, expectancy is the belief that increased effort will lead to increased performance. That is, if I work harder, then this will be better. This is affected by such things as, first, having the right resources available, for instance, raw materials and time. Secondly, having the right skills to do the job. Thirdly, having the necessary support to get the job and to get the job done, for instance, supervisor support or correct information on the job. Instrumentality is the belief that if you perform well, that a valued outcome will be received. The degree to which a first level outcome will lead to the second level outcome. That is, if I do a good job, there is something in it for me. This is affected by such things as, firstly, clear and understanding of the relationship between performance and outcomes. That is, the rules of the reward, the game. Secondly, trust in the people who will take the decisions on who gets what outcome. Thirdly, transparency. Transparency of the process that decides who gets what outcome. Valence is the importance that the individual places upon the expected outcome. For the valence to be positive, the person must prefer attaining the outcome to be attaining it. For example, if someone is mainly motivated by money, he or she might not value offers of additional time off. At first glance, this theory would seem most applicable to a traditional attitude work type of situation, where how motivated the employee is depends on whether they want the reward on offer for doing a good job and whether they believe more effort will lead to that reward. However, it could equally apply to any situation where someone does something because they expect a certain outcome. For example, I recycle paper because I think it's important to conserve resources and to take a stand on environmental issues. That's VALENCE. I think that the more effort I put into recycling, the more paper I will recycle, expectancy. And I think that the more paper I recycle, then the less resources will be used, instrumentality. So the expectancy model is not about self-interest in rewards, but about the associations people make towards expected outcomes and the contribution they feel they can make towards those outcomes. Expectancy theory predicts that employees in an organization will be motivated when they believe that putting in more effort will yield better job performance. Better job performance will lead to organizational rewards, such as an increase in salary or benefits. These predicted organizational rewards are valued by the employee in question in order to enhance the performance outcome tie. Managers should use systems that tie rewards very closely to performance. Managers also need to ensure that the rewards provided are deserved and wanted by the recipients. In order to improve the effort performance tie, managers should engage in training to improve their capabilities and improve their belief that added effort will in fact lead to better performance. Whereas Maslow and Herzberg look at the relationship between internal needs and the resulting effort expended to fulfill them, Vroom separates effort which arises from motivation, performance, and outcomes. Vroom's model partly resembles the equity theory of motivation. People will also compare outcomes for themselves with others. Equity theory suggests that people will alter the level of effort they put in to make it fair compared to others according to their perceptions. So if we got the same raise this year, but I think you put in a lot less effort, this theory suggests that I would scale back the effort I put in. Other theories don't allow for the same degree of individuality between people. This model, however, takes into account individual perceptions and thus personal histories, allowing a richness of response not obvious in Maslow or McClelland. So, who assume, Maslow and McClelland, who assume that people are essentially all the same. Expectancy theory could also be overlaid over another theory, for instance Maslow. Maslow could be used to describe which outcomes people are motivated by, and Vroom to describe whether they will act based upon their experience and expectations.